At this 71st session of the Imperial Diet, I have the honor of stating the views of the government. At a time when our nation is confronted by serious problems and difficulties, I have been most unexpectedly appointed Premier, and I am keenly aware of the heavy burden I have taken on my shoulders. I desire to elucidate, first of all, the principle which underlies the endeavors of the government to fulfill its immense responsibilities. This principle is to make all our policies stem from a single source, namely, the spirit of the solemn and superb polity of our empire. Expression of this spirit means that externally we should, in concert with other powers, strive to establish true peace firmly in the world, in accordance with international justice, and to enhance more and more the prestige of our nation abroad. And that internally we should define clearly the relationship between sovereign and subjects, and enable each of the people to find his proper place in accordance with social justice, bringing about thereby a steady and healthy advance of the national fortunes. Such, then, is the principle the government expects to observe in formulating and carrying out its policies along various lines. It is a source of profound regret that, with the troublesome question with the Soviet Union brought to a peaceful settlement and relations with other powers increasingly amicable, there has occurred the present incident in China, and that the government has been compelled to make an important decision. I am very grateful, however, that the government has been accorded the united support of the nation at this critical moment. In sending troops to North China, of course, the government has no other purpose, as was explained in its recent statement, than to preserve the peace of East Asia. I cannot but hope most fervently that reconsideration and self-discipline on the part of the government and people of China will make speedily possible a fundamental adjustment of Sino-Japanese relations. In view of the current circumstances at home and abroad, it is of the most urgent necessity for us to perfect our national defense and develop the economic power of our country. Accordingly, as the basic means of carrying out our national policy, the government feels imperative need to devise a comprehensive scheme aiming principally at expansion of the nation's productive power, establishment of equilibrium in international accounts, and adjustment of the supply of and demand for commodities. Investigations are in progress with a view to formulating a concrete program based on the conception of Japan and Manchukuo as a single unit. The new year is with us amid the storm and stress of the China affair. Today, at this session of the Imperial Diet, which faces a momentous crisis of our nation, I have the honor to wish with you a long life to our sovereign, and prosperity and happiness to the Imperial House, before stating to you the views of the government. I have been moved beyond words by the imperial message that was graciously. It is scarcely necessary for me to say that Japan's immutable national policy aims at building the edifice of permanent peace for East Asia on the unshakable foundation of close cooperation between Japan, Manchukuo, and China, and to contribute thereby to the cause of world peace. The adoption, some time ago, of our determined policy not to deal with the obdurate Kuomintang government of China, and the exertion of ceaseless efforts towards the cultivation of friendly relations with the powers have been both dictated by this policy of the government. We all rejoice for the sake of world peace that the tripartite anti-Comintern agreement between Japan, Germany, and Italy was completed through the participation of Italy last fall. It is now more than half a year since the commencement of the present conflict. The fields of hostilities have been extended from North China to Central and South China. The valorous and daring operations of the imperial forces have brought us victory after victory. Nanking, the Chinese capital, quickly fell into our hands. The situation is developing most favorably for Japan. While this is, of course, due to the august virtue of our sovereign, I am profoundly grateful for the loyalty and courage of the officers and men of the imperial forces at front, and for the ardor and enthusiasm of all our people at home. Now the government look forward to the emergence of a new Chinese regime which may really be counted upon to cooperate with Japan. And with such a regime, they intend to adjust the Sino-Japanese relations and lend their hands in the rehabilitation of China, and in laying firmly thereby the foundation for a permanent peace of East Asia. Needless to say, there will be no change in Japan's policy to respect the sovereignty and territorial integrity of China and the legitimate rights and interests of third powers in China. The mission of Japan as a stabilizing force of East Asia is greater, and our obligations have grown heavier than ever. In order to fulfill this mission and to discharge these obligations of ours, we must certainly be prepared to make hereafter still greater sacrifices than we have made heretofore. But unless we resolve to do this, we only lay in store misfortunes for the future. I believe that to bear such sacrifices is a noble duty that we of the present generation owe to posterity. It is under a conviction such as this that our government are striving with all their might to deal with the China affair and to achieve the end they have in view. And for that, they are working for the completion of the plans for the national mobilization, both material and spiritual, and the execution of the various necessary measures. Under page 440, this policy, the government realize the first necessity of replenishing armaments and filling the national treasury, and accordingly, emphasis has been placed on this point in regulating country's economy and finances. As regards the budget for the coming fiscal year, it has been so compiled as to devote as much money and material possible to the fulfillment of military requirements and to curtail, as far as possible, the general consumption of the goods and funds having to do with military supplies. In the field of industry, the basic principle of the government will be laid in the increase of our nation's productive power under the one comprehensive scheme covering Japan, Manchukuo, and China. And efforts are to be exerted towards supplying the articles needed for national defense, promoting all the important industries, and expanding our export trade. As for our work at the home front, not only everything will be of course done in order to keep our officers and men at front free from all anxieties for those at home, but suitable and effective measures will be taken to provide for the relief of the families of those killed, wounded, or taken ill. Far distant still is the end of the conflict. We should expect that it will be a long time before a settlement is reached. Ours is indeed a momentous task unparalleled in history. We shall never succeed in accomplishing the task unless all of us show the dauntless spirit of gladly and courageously offering ourselves to our country. Let me assure you that the government, with patience and perseverance and a resolute will, expect to reach a settlement of the affair. In accordance with these views, the necessary bills together with the budget are being presented to you, on which I earnestly hope that you, appreciating the intentions of the government, will give your approval. It is my great pleasure, on this occasion of the birthday anniversary of the late Emperor Meiji, and once more remembering the high virtues of the Emperor, to enunciate the views of the government in connection with the establishment of peace in the Far East, the work of which has been bequeathed to us from the late Emperor. Following closely on the heels of the fall of Canton, Hankow, which forms the heart of the interior of China, came under Japanese control. A vast area involving the 7 important cities which control the functions of modern China is in the hands of the Japanese army. There is a well-known saying that those who control the vital areas of China control whole China. The Chiang Kai-shek administration has practically been reduced to a mere local regime, while reserving her sufficient fighting power for rejecting interference from outside Japan, has secured the brilliant achievements. This is due to the strenuous efforts on the part of the brave officers and men, under the august virtue of His Majesty, the Emperor. And the sense of gratitude of the people has never been moved so profoundly as on the present occasion. The people's gratitude goes to a great number of those who have fallen or been wounded in the incident. We feel that we are doubly duty-bound toward this priceless sacrifice. First of all, we must attain the objectives of the current fighting by succeeding to the will of those who have been sacrificed in the incident. Next, we must not forget to repay those families and relatives of the sacrificed. Japan holds the key to the disposal of China. However, what Japan sincerely desires is the development and not the ruin of China. It is China's cooperation and not conquest that Japan sincerely desires. Japan desires to build up a stabilized Far East by cooperating with the Chinese people, who have awakened to the need of self-determination as an Oriental race. No country desires or understands, as Japan does, perfection of China as an independent state and China's racial aspiration and sentiment. History shows that Japan, Manchukuo, and China are so related to each other that they must bind themselves closely together in a common mission for the establishment of peace and order in the Far East by displaying their own individuality. It is a matter for deep regret, not only for the sake of Japan, but also for the sake of the Far East, that the realization of this ideal between Japan and China was hampered by the wrong policy pursued by the nationalist government. The keynote of the policy pursued by the national government is very superficial, because it was based on the trends of the temporary reactionary period following the termination of the World War. This policy was not based on the tradition and intuition which are so characteristic of the Chinese nation. The national government did everything in order to maintain its power and did not care for steady Bolshevization and colonization of China. This is not in accordance with the way pursued by China's zealous patriots, who have fought at the sacrifice of their own lives for the construction of a new China. This is the reason why Japan, which is so closely affiliated with China as one of the two greatest races in the Orient, has risen in arms to crush the Chiang Kai-shek administration, although she does not want to have a tragedy of fighting with the brother nation, China. Japan sincerely desires that China will awake. Those who are jealous of the future in China should rise up for the execution of the common mission of the Far East by pointing the Chinese people to their destined path and guide the rejuvenated China. Rehabilitation is steadily on its way in Peking and Nanking, while the spirit of rejuvenation pervades the Mongolian frontier districts. The Chinese race, which on many occasions during its history, extending over 5,000 years, held a guiding torch for the civilization of the world, should leave behind it a history compatible with the great deeds left by China's forefathers by bringing a new light to the civilization of the world and sharing with Japan in the mission for the construction of a new Far East. If the national government regains the original spirit of the Chinese race, effects changes in the policy it has pursued and the personnel, and emerges as a new administration for the reconstruction of China, Japan would not reject the participation of the national government. All countries of the world should have a clear recognition regarding the new situation in the Far East. History shows clearly that peace and independence in China have been frequently menaced as the result of the struggle for supremacy among foreign powers, which was based on imperialistic ambitions. Japan sees the necessity of effecting a fundamental revision in this situation and desires to establish a new peace fabric in Far East on the basis of justice. It goes without saying that Japan will not exclude cooperation of foreign powers. Neither she intends to damage the legitimate rights of the third powers in China. If the powers understand the real intentions of Japan and devise a policy in accordance with the new situation in the Far East, Japan does not grudge to cooperate with them for peace in the Far East. The world knows that Japan is earnestly determined to fight it out with communism. What the Comintern intends to do is Bolshevization of the Far East and disturbance of world peace. Japan expects to suppress in a drastic manner the sources of the evils of Bolshevization and their subversive activities behind the so-called long-term resistance of the Chiang Kai-shek administration. Fortunately, both Germany and Italy, which are our allies on the anti-Comintern front, understand the intentions of Japan in the Far East and have extended their moral support in the current incident, which has greatly encouraged the Japanese nation. In this respect, we extend our deep gratitude to these countries. The current incident had convinced us of the necessity of further tightening the bonds. Japan is determined also to cooperate in the re-establishment of world order guided by a common view of the world. What the world at present needs badly is the establishment of peace on a fair balance of power. There is no denying the fact that various principles in the past have forced the maintenance of the status quo marked by an unbalanced state, that the international treaty, such as the Covenant of the League of Nations, has lost its prestige is fundamentally due to this irrationality. Without making international justice a mere slogan on paper, a new peace fabric must be formed, which can keep pace with the progress of history for the basis and in accordance with international justice established all phases of human life, such as commerce, emigration, natural resources, and culture. We believe that the only means to break the current general crisis is to perfect the above-mentioned conditions. The Japanese people are placing absolute confidence in the members of the fighting services on the front and engaged in the various activities behind the gun and are perfecting the necessary conditions to meet Japan's protracted hostilities. This is very characteristic of the people. Japanese history shows that the vicissitudes of the country have always depended on the people's self-consciousness about the national structure. When we realize that the imperial throne is concerned about the establishment of permanent peace in the Far East, we subjects cannot but feel that our moral mission is indeed heavy. The Japanese people at this very juncture must face their respective duties solemnly. They must also have a clear understanding and should not err in their recognition about what kind of sacrifice and preparations is necessary for the construction of a new fabric on a moral basis in the Far East. If there is anyone in Japan who holds the idea that the fall of Hankow and Canton will immediately bring an era of peace, he does not really understand the important meaning of the current incident. Nothing is more dangerous. Japan, which is entrusted with the task of constructing a new Far East, has entered upon a new stage of creation in all fields of human life. In this sense, the actual fighting has just started. In order to be a great nation, we must proceed with the perfection of various preparations for reconstruction, both at home and abroad, with a firm faith and determination. The Japanese government are resolved, as has been clearly set forth in their two previous statements issued this year, to carry on the military operations for the complete extermination of the anti-Japanese Kuomintang government and at the same time to proceed with the work of establishing a new order in East Asia, together with those far-sighted Chinese who share in our ideals and aspirations. The spirit of Renaissance is now sweeping over all parts of China, and enthusiasm for reconstruction is mounting ever higher. The Japanese government desire to make public their basic policy for adjusting the relations between Japan and China in order that their intentions may be thoroughly understood, both at home and abroad. Japan, China, and Manchukuo will be united by the common aim of establishing the new order in East Asia and of realizing a relationship of neighborly amity, common defense against communism, and economic cooperation. For that purpose, it is necessary, first of all, that China should cast aside all narrow and prejudiced views belonging to the past and do away with the folly of anti-Japanism and resentment regarding Manchukuo. In other words, Japan, frankly, desires China to enter of her own will into complete diplomatic relations with Manchukuo. The existence of the Comintern influence in East Asia cannot be tolerated. Japan therefore considers it an essential condition of the adjustment of the Sino-Japanese relations that there should be concluded an anti-Comintern agreement between the two countries in consonance with the spirit of the anti-Comintern agreement between Japan, Germany, and Italy. And in order to ensure the full accomplishment of her purpose, Japan demands, in view of the actual circumstances prevailing in China, that Japanese troops be stationed as an anti-communist measure at specified points during the time the said agreement is in force, and also that the Inner Mongolian region be designated as a special anti-communist area. As regards economic relations between the two countries, Japan does not intend to exercise economic monopoly in China, nor does she intend to demand of China to limit the interests of those third powers who grasp the meaning of the new East Asia and are willing to act accordingly. Japan only seeks to render effective the cooperation and collaboration between the two countries. That is to say, Japan demands that China, in accordance with the principle of equality between the two countries, should recognize the freedom of residence and trade on the part of Japanese subjects in the interior of China, with a view to promoting the economic interests of both peoples, and that in the light of the historical and economic relations between the two nations. China should extend to Japan facility for the development of China's natural resources, especially in the regions of North China and Inner Mongolia. The above gives the general lines of what Japan demands of China. If the true object of Japan in conducting the present vast military campaign be fully understood, it will be plain that what she seeks is neither territory nor indemnity for the costs of military operations. Japan demands only the minimum guarantee needed for the execution by China of her function as a participant in the establishment of the new order. Japan not only respects the sovereignty of China, but she is prepared to give positive consideration to the questions of the abolition of extraterritoriality and of the rendition of concessions and settlements, matters which are necessary for the full independence of China.